Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Drake. I'm the provost at the New York Academy of Art. I want to welcome you to our fall lecture series. Tonight, we are very happy to have Joe Figg joining us. Joe's an artist who's known for work that explores the creative process, spaces where art is made and contemplated. His work has been exhibited nationally and internationally with over 30 solo and 50 group exhibitions. Joe is represented by Cristin Tierney Gallery in New York, where his current exhibition, Contemplating Compositions, is on view till October 21st. I just went and saw it. It's amazing. You've got to go. Definitely put it on your map. Barbara McAdams for the Brooklyn Royal wrote, Joe Figg extends his exploration of the practice into and out of the realm of novelty. Here he dives into the experience of the landscape of an artwork, its dimensions, positions, neighbors, and responses to light and to us, its inhabitants. He does all of this while bringing us face to face with almost deadpan with the work itself. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Boston Globe, Artforum, Art in America, Art News, Two Coats of Paint, and Modern Painters, as well as several international magazines. Joe is the author of the acclaimed books Inside... Oh, no. Sorry about that. Okay, you can go home now.
Give me a sneak peek.
Yeah. Joe's the author of the acclaimed books Inside the Painter's Studio and Inside the Artist's Studio, which share an intimate view inside of the studios of today's leading artists. His work can be found in numerous collections, including the Parrish Museum, Norton Museum, New Museum, and the Fogg Museum. Joe is the department chair of both the Fine Arts and Visual Studies at Ringling College of Art and Design. Got a few Ringling people here tonight. He earned his BFA and MFA from the School of Visual Arts. Please give a warm New York Academy of Art welcome to Joe Figg.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'd like to thank, of course, Peter Drake, Amy Hughes, and all of you, the New York Academy artists, students for being here, as well as some amazing friends who've come from all over the world to be here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. How many people here are artists? All right, great. This is my crowd. All right, so I have a lot of slides. I promise this will hopefully be energetic and entertaining because there's nothing worse than a boring lecture. So I am going to get started. And all right, so as artists, we know we often see work in museums and galleries where the work is perfectly lit and perfectly hung and looks amazing, right? But it's really the artist's studio. There we go. That has interested me as a subject matter over the years. And some famous studios, this is Francis Bacon, previous one, Lucian Freud, right? And Francis Bacon's studio, if you don't know, it was a disaster. And I'll kind of get to this, but people that always ask me, would I ever do a sculpture of Francis Bacon's studio? I'm like, heck no, because it was way too much. And so what they did with his studio was interesting, is that they had forensic scientists come in and actually map out the whole thing, and then they relocated his studio to become a museum in Dublin. And then they set it all up again. So the studio, though, has been a subject throughout the history of art. And so this is an example, and of course, Courbet's The Painter's Studio is a really great example of that. Seurat did a painting of models within his studio, and what I love about this then is that you can see the artworks, his work behind him. And then this is a picture of this is my studio. So currently the last 6 years I've been down in Sarasota, Florida to oversee the Ringling College program. And this is my studio in Collinsville, Connecticut, which is in northwestern Connecticut. So that's what my studio looked like. Or is it? It's a miniature sculpture of my studio. Told you. So I'm going to take a step back and kind of go to my, that's a little too far step back, but my later early years of when I was an undergraduate student at School of Visual Arts. Yeah, I had a lot more hair back then. And so artwork doesn't, it doesn't come from nowhere, right? There's like, you kind of see things and you think like, oh, this just kind of appeared. There's a trajectory of the work and how it evolved. So I'm going to go through that because one thing kind of leads to another. So early influences was this book by Studs Terkel called Working, where he interviewed, it was published I think in 1974, and he interviewed everyone from like professional athletes to janitors to stewardesses to CEOs on what they did, and just asked them like, what do you do in your, like what's a typical day? So that was a big influence. The other influence was Eric Fischl's multiple canvases from the 80s, where he started layering those. David Hockney's photo collages. And in fact, these were so much of an influence, I literally started making, this is a painting I made, and the bottom image is actually photos. For you kids are too old to like don't even know this, but we used to get like our photos like printed at like the CVS or something, 1 hour photo place, and I would literally cut them up like David Hockney and kind of create these collages, which then would literally impact the composition of the work. Red Grooms, his installations and sculptural paintings. It's like a hybrid of sculpture and painting. And then even like Neil Young. I wanted to make like artwork that was like a Neil Young song, right? And then something I've always thought about, and kind of my own theory is like, I do think for young artists who are working, or even older artists, like, does like the work you're making like reflect the music you're listening to, right? So these are kind of some quick paintings, but again, back in college, but these were kind of common themes that I saw once going back to this. So the creative process, that was a self-portrait of my painting table. This was the student, so we all have studios, right? This is the guy who was across from me, John Kiltika, had a studio. So this was a painting, and so you could see these sculptural, it was a canvas and then these cutout pieces extended off the canvas. And that was about a 7 foot, he was like 6'7" or something. That was a tall canvas, so his feet kind of extended off. But artists kind of, in a studio. Friends and fellow creatives, this is later when I was up in Woodstock, New York. These are all sort of poets and writers. The people on the right are from the B-52s. For those of us who know the band, the B-52s. That was a college friend of mine who was passed out on his couch. Some other friends, relationships, right? And then people at work. So I look at work and started thinking of the artist as work. And then these are just a couple other quick paintings. So I did that work for about 10 years, and these are large life-size or larger than life-size paintings. I wanted to kind of have that impact of like being in like a movie, or that they were sculptural, that you then become part of that piece. But so after 10 years, hi, come on in. It's okay. I'm like, well, what do I do? I literally thought I would do that forever, and then like I kind of hit a block. I'm like, what am I going to do next? So luckily, Martha Stewart came into my life. So my sister-in-law was getting married, and my wife asked me to make these little snow globes that Martha Stewart a kit of like little vignettes of how they met. So I had to make 10 of these little things. At the same time was the first, I don't know if it was the first retrospective, but it was a big retrospective of Alice Neel at the Whitney Museum. Again, this is like probably 20, 30 years ago, and I love Alice Neel, right? I mean, her work is amazing. And of course, then there's this like famous painting of her I think she's in her 80s doing that self-portrait. And I'm like, what if I made Alice Neel in a snow globe? So I made Alice Neel in a snow globe. And that's what that sculpture looked like. And the figure this is much larger. It was probably about like 3 inches tall, right? And so I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. Let me kind of go with this. So I'm going to take a step back and go, so now I'm in grad school. And so when I was in high school, go Vikings, I had a job cleaning offices. And so one thing, and this is like when people used to like smoke cigarettes in their office, and so we'd come in at night, my brother-in-law started this job, I go in at night and clean offices, we'd empty out the garbage cans and kind of clean up their desks. And I started looking at their desks, and I couldn't help but start thinking of like, who are these people? And you kind of make up stories based on like what they have, like little photos, who's neat, who's messy, like kind of their work ethic is. And being in grad school, like you guys are here, I started looking at the studios of my fellow classmates. One of them is over here, who's right next to me, Diana Spungen, an amazing artist, and started looking at the studio as portrait. So initially I started off with historical artists, and so that's Barnett Newman, Willem de Kooning, Henry Matisse, and these older ones I started questioning like, how do you sustain a career as an artist, right? So Matisse, in this age, it was 1951, he created this whole new body of work once he was bedridden, right? And so what happened is once I started making these miniature sculptures and I started documenting the work just by taking photos, is that I was living in Williamsburg, and this gallery opened up on the ground floor, and I went in there and I came in and they're like, oh, what are you guys doing? And I'm like, who are you? I'm like, Joe Figg, I live upstairs, I'm an artist. Like, oh, what do you do? I literally had these like 4x6 photos I got developed at like the CVS, and they're like, oh, these look great, we should blow these up and make photographs. And so that's what we did, and we did a show. So this image became this photograph. I made this sculpture of Van Gogh, which I made into that photograph. This one's one of my favorites. This is the Brancusi sculpture I made. So in all these, the figures are about 6 inches tall. It's an inch to a foot scale. So it's like, kind of it's dollhouse scale. Yeah, your fingers. So it's like about that big. And this was fun because, and then that became the photograph. So I started at that time showing the sculptures and the photographs. And this was one with Brancusi because I had to make all the sculptures as well as do the figure. The problem I had, though, is that with my previous paintings, I was so used to this firsthand experience. So my process with that early work would be like, I'm like, oh my God, this would be a great painting. So I pull out my camera, take photos, and kind of do it because this interaction with live people is important. The previous artist was all from history books. So at one point, I went out to the Springs, out to Jackson Pollock's studio, on on a day like today. It was like a beautiful October day. And I thought, I want to make a sculpture of Jackson Pollock. So I took the being in that space and walking around it was very palpable. And so then I took the old photographs from Hans Namath and kind of recreated his studio. And then I took a photograph, and that was the photograph of the Jackson Pollock sculpture. So again, the figure's about 6 inches tall. So what I realized is I missed this kind of interaction. And so I reached out then to fellow teachers from SVA where I was going. And so Michael Goldberg, who's now passed away, was second generation abstract expressionist. The studio is down on the Bowery and used to belong to Mark Rothko. And he was like that kind of old, hard drinking kind of and he was like big guy, kind of like abstract expressionist. And so I went there to make a sculpture of his table. But meanwhile, he's telling these amazing stories, and the space was an old gymnasium, and there was an upstairs loft space where you kind of look down, and it was like being in a theater. And I literally left there and said shit, I wish I would have recorded that somehow because it was history. So I went home, I came up with a list of questions and stuck to these questions. And at this point, I had 10 years between undergrad and grad school. And I was working at School of Visual Arts at the time doing various programs and overseeing various things. And I'm like, how do you make that leap from your day job to becoming the idea is you could survive off your art, right? So those are the questions I wanted to do. So I just then reached out to as many contemporary artists as I can, and then just started making sculptures of them. So here's a sculpture, and then the photograph of Matthew Ritchie. I think you guys know Inka Essenhigh and Steve Mumford. So this is their dual studios. And so Inka was on one side, and then Steve, I think they're still in the same studios, right? And then these are the photographs I got from them. And there's Steve. Fred Tomaselli, one of my favorite artists. So I started making then these miniature sculptures of artists in their studios. And I was looking at the moments with all of these. You'll see they're usually not in action. They're contemplating their work. Because it's in that moment. Two things I've learned as a figurative painter. Someone had once told me, like, if you like stop motion, like say you do a painting of a baseball player who's doing this, like you're stopping, you're in the middle of action, so it's kind of different. Whereas opposed to doing a painting of someone who's maybe reading or kind of doing something still, like then time kind of changes within the painting. So I was looking at that moment of contemplation where it looks like they're not working at all, but it's really where they're working the hardest. So in this time, as a painter, I started looking at, so I was making paintings, I was making sculptures of painters. And then I started looking at the painting table as a form of portraiture. So another thing, right, as a figurative painter, like how do you do portraiture? Portraiture's been done for like thousands of years, right? It's like how do you like make it new? And so thinking of the studio and thinking as a painter and my own painting table, like that, I started looking at that as a form of portraiture. And so the unique thing was, so Gregory Amanoff, who's like really messy, he had one set of table on this side, one on this side, compared to Don Eddy, who's a photorealist, who had like this really minimal setup with the airbrushes that he still used from when he was like 18 years old. And then this is Gary Steffen's table. And so now these paintings are small. These are about kind of this big, right? And so I did this painting of Gary Steffen's table, then I made a sculpture of it. And I thought, I kind of like that idea of like the painting and the sculpture. And at that time I had my first museum show at the Bass Museum in South Beach. And so I had all the other kind of previous sculptures, and then they had these 4 sculptures of painters' painting tables. And I thought they looked great. And I'm like, so I had a show coming up at Plus Ultra Gallery, which was in Williamsburg. They eventually moved to Chelsea. This would have been in the early 2000s. And I said, I'll just do a whole show just on painters painting tables. And so that's what I did. So I just then reached out to as many artists that I knew and started going to their studios and just focusing on these table sculptures. And what I wanted to do specifically with these works is to exclude the figure and exclude any finished work. So I really wanted just the table and their process, if that kind of translates, to look, to be a portrait of them. Alexis Rockman, I think you know. Will Cotton, of course, we know. Ross Bleckner, Billy Sullivan. And then here's a detail. So Gregory Amanoff. Again, and these are an inch to a foot scale. These are small, very small works. Karen Davey. So then all these, so the paint tubes are all made out of Sculpey. So like kind of roll them out and kind of just pinch them. Like the caps that you see there are like beads. Yeah, it's all like the brushes I kind of just make with like small plastic stuff. Oh, this one I did not want to do, but like eventually I was like, it was Melissa Meyer. She had a lot of jars and things like this. And so that was a sculpture for that. And so then I had the show in 2006 at Plus Ultra Gallery. And what we decided to do is, since I had all these audio interviews, these interviews with the artists, I included them in the sculpture. And so you can kind of go down the line. Here's another install. Look at the artist studio and then hear them talking about their work. So this was a big show. This got written up in the New York Times. The show sold out. It was like a big thing. I also had this big sculpture. So I had the small ones and this big one of Eric Fischel and April Gornick. And here's a detail of that work in process. And then some detail images. Do you guys all know Eric Fischel? He's amazing, right? Awesome. So he actually gave me the architectural plans from his building, which made it a lot easier to kind of figure out how to make it. And then of course April has an amazing show. If you've not seen it, go up and see her show. It's up for another week and a half at Miles McHenry on 22nd Street. So this kind of got me a lot of attention in this time and got me 2 things. One was a show at the Parrish Museum, which was out. This is their old space, which is in Southampton. And so there's the Eric and April sculpture. And some other sculptures which I'll get into. Actually, these ones are here. Ross Bleckner studio. And then that's the interior of Ross's studio. Chuck Close. These are then the photographs of the sculptures. There's some detail to kind of get a sense of the scale. The interesting thing with Chuck is that his studio he built actually to almost the exact same dimensions as Jackson Pollock. He said he knew Lee Krasner. He's like, I don't need a big fancy studio. I kind of just need something like that. And then this was Chuck's painting table. And, so when I saw this, I'm like, that's your painting table? It's like plywood and 2x4s. And so a little quick side note. So then I made, from miniature, this is another project, I made a life-size replica of that, along with the miniature. So I had so that's Chuck's real table, and that's my miniature version of it, and then that was my life-size replica of Chuck's table. I wanted to look like a Gordon Matta Clark, as if I went to a studio, cut out like a section of his floor and kind of put that there. And then I had his voice kind of going through. That piece never sold, and then it's me. I end up using it as my own painting table, and it had great mojo. The other thing this led to was my book inside the painter studio. And look, I think hopefully what you get out of this, as an artist, you kind of just go down this path and kind of just go down the river. You throw in and you kind of go, and it takes you downstream. I never intended to write a book, but I had all these interviews. I had all these documentary photos of just their studios, and then I had my own work. And then I'll quickly go through the process. So Joan Snyder, really great artist. So I'd go see Joan's studio, and then I would I'd do my interview with her, and then I'd photograph and document everything. These are her various tables, her floor, which was just beautiful. Her collection of monkeys that she had. Why do you have monkeys? But she did. And then that was her table area, and then that was the finished sculpture. Another example, Ryan McGinnis. So Ryan, completely opposite of Joan. He works with silk screens. So I'm just in there also just looking for great, there's so much great images, right? So even his table here of materials. And then he actually got in the process of working. So now I'm going to contradict myself because I said never to do an image of someone working, but he did. So I told him to freeze. So he freezes. So then I kind of took all these images, and then I made that sculpture of him working. And I have one last one, which is my favorite. Was probably my favorite studio. Was a studio of Philip Taft. Mega crazy studio, right? So his studio, which eventually he moved out of since I did this, was on I think 30th Street between 5th and 6th, and also is an old gymnasium. So he had this big, huge center area with this whole outdoor terrace. But not only that, then he had these back rooms. He had a room behind it, and he had all these things there. But not only that, he had an 18th century billiards room and a Renaissance library. I know, it was I'm this is amazing. And so then what I do is I ask the artist, I'm one of the questions I ask is when you're contemplating your work, how do you sit or stand? And so then they kind of get in their pose, because everyone has their contemplation pose, right? And so he kind of, he's kind of like this. And then I'll photograph them, in the round, and then sort of piece it all together so that I can make a sculpture. The one I remember really being most nervous about was Eric Fischl, because he was such an influence. I'm gonna be I can't believe I'm photographing Eric Fischl. But they all get so serious. It's how do you contemplate your work, And this was the finished sculpture. So I have a couple questions that I've asked. So one of the questions is, when did you consider yourself a professional artist and were able to dedicate yourself full-time to that pursuit? So Gregory Amanoff said, in 1971, I literally declared myself a professional artist with no qualifications whatsoever. I left Wisconsin and moved to New York and began painting as though I knew exactly what I was doing. Can you describe a typical day? So, I'm like you guys. I'm in undergrad or grad school. How do you kind of do this? And so, can you describe a typical day? So I'll go. Here we go. Will Cotton. This blew my mind. He goes, I generally get up around 7. I go out, get some coffee, read the paper, and I'm here working by 9. I take a lunch break around noon, and then I work till 5. It's a very standard business day, really, 9 to 5. And I'm that makes so much sense. Yeah, it's not romantic. Exactly. It's not romantic at all. It's work, right? And there's a painting I made of Will. And then, of course, going back to Eric Fischl, who said, my discipline is that I work on a regular basis rather than in spurts. I certainly don't wait around for inspiration. That was Eric's studio. And then, did you ever work for another artist? And if so, did that have any effect on the way you work? And so here I'm going to quote myself, because when I was an undergraduate student, I worked for a painter named Peter Dean. His studio was down also on Spring Street in the Bowery. And I didn't, so this is not quoting myself, I didn't really understand what being an artist was about. You kind of have these ideas. It was my first experience being with a real artist. When you work for another artist, you see how they live, how they work. If you're not familiar with it, it gives you a sense of reality to what an artist really does. It makes it tangible and possible to attain for yourself. In fact, it's had a huge influence on me that I wasn't even aware of until recently. I believe the work I'm doing now stems from that fascination and the joy I had being in his studio. And this is my studio. At this point, I moved up to Norwalk, Connecticut. These are some images of my studio. So the gallery I'm with now, Cristin Tierney, before she had a gallery, she was also president of the Lower East Side Print Shop. So she asked me to be a visiting artist. And so I go to the Lower East Side Print Shop, and I thought they brought an image, and I'm like, oh, I'll just bring an image in, and they'll just kind of like run the different screens and kind of just like do it for me. And like, no. So I'm like, well, what am I going to bring in? So I had this sculpture of Inca Essenheis floor, which was a miniature one, probably about the size of this paper. And then that was the image on the lower right was a photograph of the sculpture, right? And so I thought I wanted to work from that image, and I came up with this screen. What I didn't know, and this is another good lesson for artists, is I'd done some etching before, but I never done screen printing. And so this had 24 color separations, and I didn't know that was a lot, because it's like, I don't know, I've never done it before. And they're like, that's a lot of screens. Because you have to separate like all the like red, like light red, and you kind of basically block those out and kind of mark, with a brush, put that sheet aside, then you do medium red and kind of go through all the colors. But that's kind of what it needed. So you can kind of see like the progression of the work, right? So this then got me back into wanting to paint, because it's that process of really looking at an image, kind of dissecting the color, and then working backwards in sort of the process. And so, but I'm like, well, what am I going to paint, right? So also at that time, I was kind of like, I was like a little like depressed, and like kind of felt like a little like schlubby. I'm like, I have an idea. I'm like gonna like go to like my local library. I'm gonna like get like a good like art audio. I'm gonna like an art audio book, and like exercise and kind of like get in shape, get my mind in shape, and be like like a good, smart, creative person, right? So what this led to, again, total by chance. I asked for the Darien, Connecticut library, like, did they recommend a book? And they recommended this book called The Judgment of Paris. And so I got the audio version of it, and what was so great with the audio version, it's narrated by a British author, so right away it's like you're hooked. It's like Downton Abbey, right? It's like you're in this world. And so this book focused on the two main characters were Ernest Messonnier, who I'd never heard of, and of course Edward Manet, which we all know. Messonnier, the book focuses on 1863 to 1873. And Messonnier, who at the time was literally considered like greatest painter in all of France. They thought he'd go down, Delacroix said he'll go down in like the annals of art history as like France's greatest painter, and all that stuff. And these were the paintings that he made. And they were very much in the style of Vermeer, but also focusing on like a previous like 100-year, like a previous generation of like a better, bygone time of musketeers and kind of people, So he'd set up these costume scenes and doing this, right? Meanwhile, Manet is like, kind of, a man of the people, and is like trying to invent like modernism. Right? And so the thing is, at that time, if you wanted to show your work, if you're in France, the only way to show it is through the salon, right? Now, if you got into the salon, you would then put into a room with your last name. So Manet begins with an M. He went into the same room with Messonnier, where he was trying to get into that room. Messonnier is the greatest painter of all of France, right? So what Manet started to do was actually make paintings mocking Messonnier. And so here and Messonnier had these people in like musketeer costumes in this, right? So, he just dressed up Victorine Murat as a musketeer, as a matador. The on the lower left of the painting of his son Leon, there's that armor, which supposedly is like a direct reference to like Messonnier and kind of his armor, right? Other thing Manet did was actually steal compositions from previous art history and then manipulate them. And so this painting, Luncheon on the Grass, comes from the corner image that. And so I'm like, this is kind of interesting. So this is my first time. I'm like, I want to make a series of paintings based on this book, but I didn't want to necessarily like illustrate them. But I've never done that before because all my previous work came from firsthand experience. So I'm like, how do I do this? So Ernest Messonnier, he's there, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? So one day I'm at my dentist's office, right, Dr. Stebbins, and he puts the Novocaine in, so then you have to wait for it to kind of take. So I'm sitting there waiting, and then I'm looking around as kind of local dentist at all his like family photos, and I'm like, he looks just like Messonnier. So I'm like, again, like, how do you like? You can't like make this stuff up, right? So I'm like, he looks just like Messonnier. So I started like asking him to like fill in for Messonnier. And so Messonnier's process was really fascinating. You know, as an artist, his works, it's good. But so some things that Messonnier would do, he was obsessed with process. So at the time, these two paintings are actually at the Met right now. People used to paint horses in that full gallop. And he was obsessed with getting the horses correct, Messonnier. So this is also at the Met. This is the Messonnier painting. He worked 10 years on this painting. And he was so obsessed with getting the horses correct that within the story in the book, he actually built a rail system on his property. He had this big estate outside of France, would have his son ride down while he would get on a cart being pushed by his servants and kind of take notes. And he was actually so accurate that when the Murbridge photographs of the horses came out like about 5 or 6 years after, he was almost like spot on. Another scene within the book, like his son, he was working on these paintings for 10 years. His son is fencing in his studio and cut a hole in the painting 4 years in. And I'm like, oh, this looks like a good kind of idea. So I'm like, well, how do I make this painting? And so I kind of Google like fencing and kind of look for all these poses. And I'm kind of superimposing different studio scenes or a couple of images of Messonnier's studio. And then I had my neighbor Chip come over. I had 2 small kids at the time, and he's like, I'm moving like your hands, like this, kind of get it like dramatic. He's holding my kids like a little toy, and then I eventually made that painting. Another thing about artists from that time is that we always think of like the Impressionists, right, as these old, like Monet, these old men with like white beards. But at the time, they were like these like 20-year-old like upstarts who were like fighting the man, like they were like fighting the system. So I wanted to do a painting of like of them from that time. And so I took self-portraits of the group of artists from that period, and then I made this painting. And so then I'm like, I want to do it like an album cover. And so then I started Googling album covers, and actually I should have the slide. I don't have it. There's the band, which is literally this is the exact album cover, except I added Bazille, Frederick Bazille on the outside. And then I just superimposed like Degas' face, Manet, Renoir, Pissarro, and Monet with like a little like dust stash before he could even grow one. And this is a fun painting. Another painting from that period was the Salon of the Jury. So all these paintings were rejected. It's like all those Manet paintings up there were rejected, along with the Whistler on the right. And Messonnier was a judge during that period. So finally, Messonnier, another painting from that series, Manet gets in with Olympia and some other things, and so now that's how they used to figure out how the layout would go for room M. And now these are large scale paintings. So now these are like 6 foot by 7 foot. Like they're back to these large scale paintings. So I'm just going to quickly go through the process of like how do I do this. So this is a painting. So the book starts off with it's like a cold winter day in January, and the great French painter Ernest Messonnier goes out to his estate in Poissy, gets on a wooden horse, looks at his reflection in a mirror. He's dressed like Napoleon and paints the light falling across the coat so that he can get it exact. So I'm like, that's a great image, right? So I'm like, this is the painting that I ended up doing with it. So I'm like, well, how do I come up with that? So I started off with my kid's toy in the backyard. I made a miniature little wooden horse. and used one of his figures. And then I kind of figured out what the composition would be like. And then I'm like, all right, next thing I made then a life-size wooden horse, and I set my camera up with like a timer. I'd set it, run up, jump on the horse, and I kind of tried these different poses, right? And then I kind of figured out how this would work. And then I did just like Messonnier. I waited for a snowy day in January, dressed up like Napoleon, hopped on my wooden horse, and had my neighbor, who was an architect and also like an art collector or art, who has a good eye, take like 200 photographs. And the thing is with this though, it's like actually an awkward pose. Like you wouldn't actually, because like my arm is actually bented, but I wanted to kind of get the palette kind of showing. So a lot of it is like you just keep like taking like photos until you kind of get what you want. So this worked out great. The problem is I don't look like Messonnier, but my dentist does. So I had Dr. Stebbins come over, he sat in my kid's playroom, and then put the hat on and kind of posed, and then that became that painting. So that worked out well. So I kind of finished that series, and I'm like, well, what else am I going to do next? So at this point, I started working kind of in bodies of work, and so one of the things be like my parents, it's like, oh, why do you want to be an artist? You're going to like starve to death and be like penniless and poor, right? So I'm like, right, we all hear that, like, well, where does that myth come from? And so I think part of that comes from films about artists. So then I started looking at films about artists and how they were depicted, and then I was looking at certain moments. Within the film, I wanted to look at artists at work, relationships, critique, and also contemplation. And so opposite of those big life-size paintings, I'm thinking, well, what's the right scale for these paintings? I didn't want to make them, since they were based on films, I didn't want to make them the size of films. And I thought first in like something like this size, like a TV, and I didn't think that was good. So then I wanted to make them small. They're a little more intimate. So I went through all these films, and these aren't necessarily film stills, but they're kind of composites from these different movies. And so this is Raphael. So the cool thing with a lot of these movies is like there's all these other artists in these films who are not the main star, but they're only in it for like 5 minutes. So this is from Agony and the Ecstasy, starring Charlton Heston and Michelangelo. So Raphael is in the movie, right? But only for like a few minutes. So he's all kind of painting this like small chapel. And then Rex Harrison, who's the Pope, is like coming in and he's like critiquing him. And it's like, even like Raphael gets critiqued, right? It's like you can't like avoid being critiqued. The earliest film I found was a 1934 film about Rembrandt, starring Charles Laughton. And so this is a scene from the movie where he's kind of trying to, figure out, contemplating his work. Later, it's what's his name? Colin Firth as Vermeer. Some of these movies are terrible, but they were like had really good footage. This is a film on Goya, and I've actually seen this in other films. They used to paint at night. This is back in the 1800s, and put candles on their heads so that they can kind of light up their work so that they're working. Kirk Douglas as Van Gogh. So this I thought was cool because it was like very authentic sort of interior of Van Gogh with Anthony Quinn as Gauguin, and they're kind of in their studio working. There's another one, Pizarro. Pizarro makes a lot of cameos in all these movies, but there's no movie about Pizarro. So this is like Van Gogh and his brother Theo meet Pizarro in the park, and he's like kind of like has this great like philosophical art discussion. Van Gogh meets Seurat. This is great. So John Malkovich as Gustav Klimt, and then Egon Schiele, again, he's in the film for like 5 minutes, but we all know Egon Schiele, right? How great he is. Like he's like so like elongated in it, and this guy was so Egon Schiele. He was like great. So they were playing like a drawing game at like a table. So I thought that was a good painting. Jose Ferrer as Toulouse-Lautrec at the Moulin Rouge. Anthony Hopkins, I didn't know this. Matisse is in a film, so again as a side character, and so it's Anthony Hopkins as Picasso, and they're kind of critiquing a painting, right? And then also Andy Garcia as Modigliani. And then Frida Kahlo doing a triple self-portrait. So I'm kind of looking at these, kind of see like what's a good composition, kind of get the artist in the studio working. It kind of reflects, sort of what I was interested. And then of course one of the later films, Basquiat. And so that was like David Bowie as Warhol. and then Basquiat. So they're working on a painting together, and they're like, is this good? I don't know. And then Parker Posey was Mary Boone, and then they're like the collectors are in Basquiat's studio. So that was another fun body of work. So I had that body of work, and so artists kind of go through this. Some days you're like, I am the most amazing artist in the world, and the next year you're like, I am like a loser, and like I've wasted the last 20 years of my life. So I was having sort of post-show blues, and so I went to visit my friend Yorgo, who had a place here in Midtown. He's a video artist, and just with no agenda. I just kind of went, we kind of just hung out, and I left, and I literally, I was halfway down the block, and I'm like, I want to go back there. So I went back, I turned around, buzzed him, got up to his loft, and I'm like, I kind of missed this interaction. So I'm like, Yorgo, I'm like, strike a pose. So he kind of goes like that, right? So that made me then want to make a sculpture. So then I made that sculpture of Yorgo. And that got me wanting to go back into artist studio. And so my first book, Inside the Painter Studio, it actually did, I think we had like 7 or 8 editions to it. It actually did pretty well. And so I reached out to my publisher and said, like, would you want to be interested in doing a second book? And so they said yes. So I didn't want to necessarily repeat the same book, but basically I took the same format and came up with the second book, was called Inside the Artist Studio. And this book focused on sculptors. There's a few of them there. Photographers. Laurie Simmons, Ellen Carey, some video and performance artists, and then some painters, right? So kind of the same format. So then, kind of question I would ask is, so do you remember an early artwork from childhood that got recognition? So when I was in nursery school, I had made like I can't remember. It was like a folded paper kind of thing, and I got like praise for it. And so, as a young artist, like we're all in school, right? You kind of get, it's like you get encouraged for doing that. So that's the kind of question I ask. And so Leonardo Drew says, yes, it would have been this larger-than-life painting of Captain America. It was bigger than me. There's a photo of me posing in front of it, and I'm wearing these tattered clothes. It was an art piece in itself. That's the photo they used in my newspaper for my first exhibition as a child. That's it. And then Tom Otterness said, the earliest piece would have been this little ceramic lion that I made in 3rd grade. It was my Jackson Pollock. I dripped every stain and glaze onto it, and I still have it. And he goes to the shelf, and he has this thing from 3rd grade. He's like in his late 60s at the time. And then this was the image I made of his studio. Kind of a dumb question. How often do you clean your studio, and does that affect your work? Will Ryman, who's a sculptor, said, I clean the studio after every show. I like to start with a fresh space. In fact, the sculpture Infinity came directly from cleaning my studio. I had all these chip brushes everywhere, and I was cleaning and stacking the brushes up, and I started to see them becoming a shape. I wanted to stack them as high as the ceiling. I wanted to make these caves out of the stacked brushes. So that piece came directly out of cleaning the studio. And he goes, it's funny, he goes, my dad, who's the famous painter Robert Ryman, said, always said, if you're stuck, clean your studio. And Ross Bleckner also said, if you're stuck in the studio, start cleaning your studio, put things away, kind of just organizing, and through that, you'll start making work. And then actually Ross quoted Brancusi, I guess, said the same thing. So it's a good advice. How'd you get your first gallery, right? Everyone wants to know that. Do you guys know Ellen Altfest? You do, right? So Ellen, for you younger people, you didn't know this, but back in the 2000s, there was a time when younger artists were coming right out of grad school and getting shows. So she said, my first show was in New York at Bellwether Gallery. The owner, Becky Smith, and I had gone to graduate school together at Yale. Becky opened a gallery to show work by her peers. I was lucky at the time because there wasn't a lot of interest in showing younger artists' work. So if you don't know this, but at the time, Bellwether Gallery was like really a breakthrough in that this was a peer from grad school, a recent Yale graduate, opened up a space. His way out was in Greenpoint at the time at first, and eventually to Williamsburg, and eventually to Chelsea, and just started showing work by her friends. And it started to get hot. So Ellen Althess, she's insane. So when I saw her in northwestern Connecticut, she was working on that little painting on the right, which is basically of that log that's in front of her. And when I saw her, that was in late October. She had started in March. She went another month into like deep into the wintertime to work on that. So her work is like, she'll work on a project for like months and months and months. And here's some other examples of her work. And she works on a one-to-one scale. So these are all one-to-one scale. And kind of very mundane objects, but very precise. And then, the funny thing with her, I was thinking, looking at the studio, like that was her studio, was her outdoor space. So then that's where I made the sculpture. And then, so another one, Eve Sussman, who's a video artist, I thought this was a great story. She says, so again, how did you get your first gallery show? She says, totally by working outside the system and doing things outside the ordained art world. Self-made, underground stuff. Me, Simon Lee, and 4 other artists took over this beautiful townhouse in the West Village. It was here in New York, right? Our friends got the job of house sitting while it was for sale. And so they said to the owners who were in London, would you mind if we put on a little art show in your house? And so they agreed, but they didn't know that they were all installation artists and sculptors, and they didn't know that she hung a gigantic piece of steel in a stairwell. Simon piled up every carpet from the house into the basement and tunneled a hole through it. She took the spiral stairwell and installed a steel pendulum, pressure fit into the walls. But that little DIY show got a lot of attention, and to their complete surprise, got written about in the Village Voice. And so from that, and that was like a pretty big deal. And so basically her first gallerist went to that show and saw it and became her first gallerist. So like, and Tom Otterness, some other artists said you have to take things into your own hands. Gallerists aren't going to necessarily come to you, make those opportunities for yourself, right? This is good. So sculptors, I always ask them, in this case I asked Judy Pfaff. So Judy Pfaff, who's an amazing sculptor, but her work is really colorful. So I asked her, were you a painter at one point? And she goes, yeah. She goes, in fact, my degrees are in painting. When I was at Yale, you had critiques in this area called the pit. And all these teachers who've known each other for over the years would start talking about your paintings. But it wasn't about your work at all. It was about abstraction versus figuration, Darwinism versus creationism, and you're sitting there useless. So I had this idea that I would make things that couldn't be moved and brought to the pit and torn apart by my professors. So I started anchoring and building work into the walls of my studio out of survival. And then these are some of her works now. She's awesome. And so with Judy, I'm like, well, what image am I going to make of Judy's place? So I'm sitting in her kitchen. We did her interview of her studio, and even her kitchen was so Judy Pfaff. It was had all these everything was color. It had these sort of pumpkin, these red tablecloth. All her pots and pans were colorful. She had all these colorful lights, and so I decided to make a painting of that. Do you have a motto or a creed that as an artist you live by? So I go back to Leonardo Drew. And he says, time, how to realize time and how to respect time. I tell my assistants when I go to a theater, I usually give the film 20 minutes to get going or I leave. If it's not happening, I get the fuck out. And they say, they're like, yeah, but you paid money for the film. And I'll say, money we can get, time, we ain't getting that back. They could steal my money, but they can't steal my time. Leonardo is great. That was the sculpture that I made of him. Roxy Payne, another really great artist, says persistence. Persistence is generally an undervalued attribute. People overvalue newness and undervalue persistence. You need to be persistent with your ideas, persistent with your vision, and persistent with your work ethic. It's true. I've seen a lot of friends of mine who are also artists, and over the years, eventually, for various reasons, not good or bad, they kind of just stop doing it. And you really have to stick with it. Cannot repeat that enough. You have to stick with it. And lastly, the question I always ask is, what advice would you give a young artist that's just starting out? So Carol Dunham said, to learn as much art history as you can and to look as much contemporary art as you can. Meet other artists and understand there's a history and a community that revolves around art. Those are the main things that can allow you to find a place to work and grow. I stress community because everything good in art seems to happen through referral. Very true. And if my gallerist was here, I'm like, how many, like you get galleries often by like your friends saying like, oh, you should go look at this person's work, you should go look at that person's work. Judy Pfaff, I'll go back to her. She says, the need to have a very lively conversation is very important. Get really good friends, talk a lot, drink a lot, and eat together a lot. Talk about your ideas and be honest with each other and have a community. Community, I keep stressing that, is really important. And then Tony Orsler, I love these artists. So when I go to an artist, like when I go to their artist studio, and like a lot of these artists, like I wouldn't know them, and then and some of them, like I wouldn't even like really care for their work. Not necessarily I wouldn't care for their work, but I wouldn't really understand it. But I thought, they're important artists. And so through the process of talking to them and kind of coming up with these questions, I would always leave thinking like, oh my God, these are like the best artists ever. Until I went to the next studio, then I'm like, you're the best artist ever. So Tony Orsler says, my advice would be, don't compromise. If you're making work, you're a success. Being an artist is the strangest proposition because you make things no one tells you to make. Then you put them out in the world, and then you expect the world to reward you in return. It's like being a beggar on the street. It's a setup for enormous disappointment and self-destruction if you can't modify that system in some way to protect yourself. The reward must be internalized and in the work. So if you're a young artist and you're contributing to the world, you have food to eat, you have a studio or a room in your house, and you're making work, that's success. That's it, period, full stop. Thought good advice. So now I'm getting to the last part, which is now my current work that I've been doing for the last number of years, contemplation. So looking back on my work, I know you said you had to leave. Thank you for coming, Marie. Really great artist. Oh, I know. Contemplation. So when I started looking, you kind of, again, think work comes from nowhere, but then you sort of look back and see these themes that kind of continue throughout the work, right? So artists, this is like when I was in grad school, undergraduate school, artists contemplating his work, right? Later, other artists contemplating their work. Again, Inka Essenhigh, Steve Mumford, Will Cotton, Carol Dunham, right? And then I had done this painting of Dana Schutz. And so if you all know Dana, she's got this great moppy head of hair. Dana and I were very lucky when we were in grad school. So this is kind of how things happen. So I was in grad school on a Thursday. Jerry Saltz called me and said, there's a space at PS1 MoMA there's a room that opened up in this big show that's opening up on Saturday. If you can get your work down there and installed, then you could be in the show. So I get down there and I meet Dana Schutz, Dana's at grad school in Columbia, and then there's this other artist named Brock and Wright. And like Dana, I'm like, I can tell her paintings were good or bad, like they were just like out there, but she was awesome. And so we got to have our work in that show, and that was my first show. I sold some work to some good collectors. We got written up in one of the papers. Anyway, so then for this project, I saw Dana, and so I did this painting of her looking at work in her studio, right, contemplating the work. So then this is where I started the series of work, which is now I've been doing for since 2016. Was very fortunate as an artist to get to have gallery shows is one thing, but then also to kind of get work in museums, right? And when you have work in museums or even galleries, right, you want the least you want people to is like just to like spend time and actually try to just really see what you're doing, right? And so then I just started looking at people looking at work, and it wasn't people who were going taking selfies. It was like people who were really invested in the work. And I was at the Met one time and passed a Rembrandt, and this woman was looking at a Rembrandt. And I was also looking at it. And then after about 5-10 minutes, I left. I went to look at some other really great works. I came back like a half hour later, and she was still there engaged. It was just like amazing, the amount of attention. And so that kind of started getting these ideas percolating. And then, so this was the first painting, or one of the first ones I did was of Fairfield Porter, who I love Fairfield Porter, beautiful paintings. And then I love then that the artist is like kind of looking back at them. And now these are small scale paintings. So I wanted to so again, thinking of scale, right? So and kind of thinking of music, I've been listening probably now longer than that, probably like 15 or so years, like jazz primarily, right? I grew up listening to Led Zeppelin, and my early paintings were like Stairway to Heaven, like these big bombastic kind of like epic songs. And then I've been listening to jazz, and I love Bill Evans. I'm like, I kind of want these works to be like a great like little like Bill Evans like piano piece, right? They don't have to be bombastic, so kind of very small and poetic. So here's a sense of the scale of these. And also working with my sculptures, which were small, right? So when you have big paintings, and there's nothing, I did big paintings, nothing at big paintings, but like when you look at them, you kind of walk into a space, you kind of could see them from a distance, and you kind of get it. With the sculptures, I would see, and with the small paintings, people then kind of gravitate towards, and it kind of sucks you in. So I kind of like that. I remember then also in the same time, there was a big show at David Zwirner, and they had like a gigantic wall. So like on this gigantic wall was one small painting like the size of a piece of paper, and it just kind of brings you in. So I kind of wanted that same effect. So I just started doing all these works, and within this series, I have sort of my own little stories I kind of like to make up, and kind of little things I like to do. So this is a painting, a self-portrait by Rudolf Stingel. Supposedly this was after an opening where he got exhausted after bed and is like sitting in his like hotel room. So what I like about these then is the artist looking at the viewer while we're looking at, you know what I mean. Here's another one. So those are two Lucian Freud self-portraits, and then an Elizabeth Peyton painting. So again, the artists are back looking at us. Max Beckmann. Oh, love Max Beckmann. These Max Beckmann self-portraits. This was at the Met. Vija Selmans. And so I just saw this painting today. This is in the J.P. Morgan Chase collection, and I was there this morning. And I hadn't seen this painting in a couple of years, but I call this arrangement in gray and black after Sargent or Whistler. Yeah, because it's like, it just kind of worked, like this is like a gray and black painting. But even like the hair of the woman on the left kind of mimics like the waves. Yeah. Hilma af Klint. So then it's just fun, like, seeing, trying to replicate these works and trying to really kind of get them. These are not like photorealist paintings. They're in person. They're a little more painterly. But I kind of like that interaction. Barclay Hendricks, I did not get a chance. Go see Barclay Hendricks. This was at Yale, and I think this painting is in the show at the Frick. So go see that show. I did not get a chance. I'll have to see it next time I'm here, because the Frick is not open Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. But I love Barclay Hendricks. This was up in Williams College at the Clark, and I had used this painting in another series of that Manet painting, which I didn't have the image of that. But anything with like a colored wall, like a purple wall or a maroon wall or brown wall, is just fun to paint. Carrie James Marshall at the Met. There was a Met Brewer. So the Met Brewer, the floor in that space is like really good. This is a friend of mine at the Ringling Museum. So this is a friend of mine we went to grad school with, an artist named Tom Lenve. And another friend of ours, Kate Gilmore, saw this painting and she goes, "Is that Tom?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "How could you tell?" Because like his like pose is like so nondescript. But so thinking again of like portraiture, like you don't need to have like the face. It's really like posture, body stance, and she knew like right away it was Tom. This was my pandemic, so right when the pandemic hit, the Donald Judd show opened up at MoMA and then like shut down. And I kind of miss those pandemic days in a way, because like museums were empty. So I wanted to make this painting with like nobody in there. This was at the Tampa Museum. This is a Diane Arbus show. So then I'm looking into like, how do you paint photographs and make them look like photographs and not like a painting? And here's some of the process. So how I do these, I come up and I'll kind of, at the end, I'll show you, I'll kind of do a step by step. But the way I build them up is I kind of, draw them out and then slowly start adding color to it, like almost like a watercolor, to kind of build up an underpainting and then kind of eventually attack it. Alice Neal with Andy Warhol. Richard Serra. So how do you do like a Richard Serra sculpture? These things are gigantic, right? And so I was at the show and like these things kind of curved and they're so overwhelming. So I thought this is kind of like my minimal. Philip Taft had a painting in his studio that was kind of up in the far corner, which kind of almost had the same composition. It was like a painting from the 60s. And so that kind of stuck in my mind. So I kind of wanted this like very sort of minimalist like split, like Richard Serra's work, right? Very minimalist split work. This is a really good show of a pairing of Frederick Church and Mark Rothko at Minution Gallery. I mean, what's so great about New York, these galleries have like museum quality exhibitions, right? This is a stunning show. There's a Rothko in the back there. Video artist, Bruce Nauman. So this is kind of fun to paint. This is still also during the pandemic. And the way to kind of do video, you can see, it's a little hard to tell, but his feet it kind of has that ghost image. And then it was just fun to paint this upside down. Jasper Johns, that was a big show at the Whitney. David Hockney drawing show at the Morgan Library. This is also another like really good show. So then it's like a matter of trying to make make them look like drawings, right? And this is fun too because it had the colored wall, but also had that wainscoting, and then also like not only like a parquet floor, but like this like cross parquet floor. It's just like the hardest part is like almost like a floor like this, where it's kind of there's like a white wall and like a concrete floor is like challenging. And so this is Jordan Castile, really good portrait painter. This is at the New Museum, and these paintings I thought were really stunning. So again, just kind of process on how I made those. This is a beautiful museum, a small museum called the Hillstead Museum up in Farmington, Connecticut, and they have it's a home of the woman who was one of the founders of Miss Porter School, and she bought all the Impressionist work at the time, like when they were like right from their studios. And so it's set up, it's her house, and it's set up still like her house with the works in situ as if they were when she lived there. And so she's got these two Monet haystacks, which were just like, it's like, I kept thinking like how could, like, wouldn't you want to just like steal this? Like there's gotta be a way to like, it must be worth millions, like that you can make like a copy and kind of sneak it in there. And so the process with that, yeah. But I'm looking at them like, just for fun, for like the wallpaper is fun to paint, like the couch, the carpet. This kind of caught me by surprise. So this is, famous painting up when I was in Cincinnati. And so I'm at the museum and I'm kind of just looking around and I'm like, that's that painting. And the way it was cropped kind of on this wall, and then I was watching this like young couple were like on a date or something and like trying to like impress her, and so they were kind of like watching each other, and I just thought that was like another good image. And so a lot what I've been also from the Morgan Library. So this painting I love. This is also from the Frick. The problem with the Frick, so currently the Frick is in its temporary space while they renovate. So I went to the Frick to actually do this to kind of capture this painting, but you can't photograph in the Frick house. And I tried. I got so busted like by a security guard. I'm like even trying to like go like oh, I'm not doing anything. And the pictures came out terrible. So finally when they moved to the other temporary location, this was there, but then at the Morgan Library they had a whole show on Holbein. And then these two women, oh my God, they show, as soon as they were like in line with like these like hats and like joppers and like the red socks. So I'll start like stalking people like based on kind of like what they're dressed. And these two women were like amazing. And so I'm like, that is like a painting like right there. And then, so again, this is at the Met, like a fur coat. I'm like, I want to paint a fur coat, but like, how do you do that? And so not only a fur coat, but then like the shearling coat on the right, which is like suede. And I love that Bruegel painting as well. And so in this case, it wasn't really about the painting. It was really about those two coats. And that was kind of fun. I kind of felt like I was very happy with those fur coats. The Winslow Homer show, that was also up. Anything with red is great. And people, like watch people like they really have like how like people stand like and look like a certain way. This was fun. So I love Nicole Eisenman, right? And so I did this painting. So this was a show last year at Hauser and Wirth, and so I'm in there. And I'm watching this group of 4 people, right? And I thought the guy on the right was maybe one of the gallery directors because he's like gesticulating, kind of talking about the work and explaining it all. So I was kind of like, photographing them. And so I made this painting, and then I posted it on Instagram. And I don't know Nicole Eisenman, but I tagged her, and she wrote back and said, "Oh my God, that's my brother and his like friend and girlfriend." And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" So then they write back, and they were like over the moon thrilled. And so last year in November, Cristin Tierney Gallery focused on my work at the ADA Art Fair on Park Avenue, and we had this show. We had this painting there, and they came, and they wore the same clothes. And they were like over the moon, and so we got to take a picture. So it's like them contemplating the painting of them contemplating the painting. I did not make a painting of this, but I thought of it. And then I was again in Cincinnati. I'm very lucky enough. I have a big collector in Cincinnati, the Taft Museum, a small museum, but in this room. So this painting kind of just was just already there. It was all set up. And so the penny's there to kind of get a sense of the scale. But the woman in the Pucci dress, the Franz Hals painting, the Gainsborough, and then that carpet and the color scheme was just I couldn't pass that up. And I love Franz Hals, so that was a good, that one kind of just made itself. And then I pretend I have little sort of political statements. This is Anna Wyant. Do you know Anna Wyant's work? Yeah, so her work was selling for $2,000 3 years ago. Now she's dating Larry Gagosian, and it goes for millions. And then they put this work up at auction at Christie's last year. And also she's done paintings with people upside down. So I love the Keith Haring kind of, in a way, could reference that. But this painting kind of also set itself up. And then photographs. So Cindy Sherman, this is her Untitled series. So this was also at Hauser and Wirth. So this is one wall had 30 photographs, and then it wasn't a big room. On the other wall had the other 30. And so then it's a little hard to tell, but you could see the reflection from the other wall in the glass of the paintings. And this painting actually was really hard because there's only those 2 people, and I kept going on juxtaposing them and how far over. Since it's a very horizontal image, do I want them one on each end? Is that too balanced? Do I have them both in the middle? And I kept shifting them over to kind of get that right composition. Finally, I think this kind of was good where she's in the middle and there's sort of the weight on that side, or I guess the weight on that side. And then, of course, general art history stuff, Velázquez. I always loved this painting. And then I was watching this couple, sort of the sentimentalist in me, holding hands, this older couple. I thought that was very sweet. So sometimes it's following people and then kind of putting them in the right position. Faith Ringgold. So then quilts. I'm painting quilts. And again, this deep blue ultramarine wall was just it was delicious. And then there's also referenced on that top floor. Matisse, also Matisse and then Picasso. So my old sort of own little in-jokes, then it's artists within artists, which is kind of what I like doing. And then this gets to the show that's up right now with some of the works that are in here. These 2 paintings, so when we were installing the show, usually I kind of lay things out beforehand, which gets thrown out the window anyway. So this time I've just brought up all this group of paintings, and we're kind of starting to see how they would lay out. And these 2 paintings, once we put them up, they worked really well together, which was a surprise. So this is Bryce Martin and Marilyn Minter. And I've been wanting to do a Bryce Martin painting for years, and I've seen him and I couldn't quite do it. And then finally, when I was in Chicago in March over spring break, I just went out there to kind of go to the museum and found this Bryce Martin painting. And so it's not only I don't want to just replicate the painting. I want to replicate the artworks in there as to my best of my ability, but it's one thing when you're looking at works in museums and you try to really kind of look, right? But then it's a whole other level of looking when then it comes to kind of trying to replicate it, because I'm not just trying to get the colors, but especially in Bryce Martin, there's all this history you can see of the where he kind of had painted over areas and he's trying to figure things out. So I tried to kind of get that history as well. The Marilyn Minter was really tough because I kept painting that red. I must have painted that painting like 3 or 4 times, and the red kept going magenta. And so eventually I went to the art store and bought like 4 more reds until I found like the right red. To another pairing, which I didn't think would be even in the show, but the Yayoi Kusama sculpture with a Raphael Lozana Hemmer. So the piece on this side, are all light bulbs that kind of hung in this undulated system. And what it was is that you'd put, there were 3 lights that were hung down, and if you put your wrist down, it would detect your pulse, and then the lights would start pulsing to the rhythm of your pulse. And there were 2 other spotlights in the back, so you can get like 3 people in there kind of and get this cool kind of undulating system. So I thought that was kind of nice, but also more, it was just like dark lights. I'm like, how am I going to paint all these lights? But I'm like, I could do it. And then like the reflection in the floor. So it was just, it's like just trying to like challenge yourself. And then Joan Mitchell. So then at my opening, so this is funny. So at my opening, this guy, these are then people looking at my work at my opening. And the guy on the left, who's also like another artist, like everyone was taking his picture because he got there early, kind of before anyone showed up, and he was like, he had like such like a pose, like he was like determined to like really look, and so everyone was like taking pictures of him. It was like really, it was very, very meta. It was funny. All right, so wrapping up, so I'm going to kind of show you sort of my process. So this is a painting I did of the Wangechi Mutu show, which is also at the New Museum. And again, like the New Museum, they do these, paint the walls like these deep, rich colors. And so this show, first off, I mean, the work was amazing. And then it had these deep, rich brown colors, and it was like a very dark space. And since these are all collages, the way the light hit it would then reflect off the plexi or the glass onto the floor, and so it was really just like dramatic lighting. So I'm there and I'm kind of looking like I want to do a painting of this, right? And so I work from photographs, and so remember early on I showed you those David Hockney photographs that I used to work from. So I still work that way, except now everything's in Photoshop. And so this was what I would call sort of my study, my drawing. I use this as a drawing for what I make the painting from. But this is actually a lot of work. Like all the work goes into this, and once I have this, painting is almost kind of then I could just kind of be free to paint what I want. So how did I make this painting? So I first started off with a blank slate, and so I had these 2 images which were at the show, and I love these. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do these. But then it was these 2 paintings that I or collages that I really loved, because I kind of loved the angle of the trees and kind of how they kind of blend into the walls and had its nice composition working together. So I bring this into Photoshop, and then I kind of want to kind of punch up the works so that they have a little more gravitas. So I make them a little bit bigger, and then I start populating it with people. So there's that woman, her. And this woman, the young one, was like really the anchor. Like her shadow and reflection and hair was just gorgeous. This person I populated, and then I brought this last woman in, right? So I actually look at these paintings because now I've made quite a number of these paintings. So the challenge with these is not being repetitive, right? And because they're basically the same format. And I really actually look at these almost as landscape, because there's a horizon line, and then there's a rhythm kind of to the figures. And there's the artwork, which could maybe be sort of the mountains or so forth, right? Or the figures could almost be mountains. So I kind of want to get this like a nice rhythm. And so this ended up being the final composition, but it doesn't like end this way. Like I spend like countless hours like agonizing over like, do I move her over a little bit? Do I move her this way? Like that 1/8 of an inch or half an inch like really makes a difference, right? Or do I shift her? How much does this woman cut into the painting edge, versus kind of being over there, right? And then I had also this couple who I thought was really good, and I'm like, oh, maybe they'll work. And then I'm like, they were kind of got like too busy, so I took them out. And then I took out the other woman. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do 4 people. But then it's like 4 is like an even number. Like, you kind of want to get, like a rhythm going. And then with Photoshop, you kind of just by making one person larger or smaller brings them to the foreground, right? So so I kind of had that composition, or then here, the people on that side. So again, just like making them slightly bigger, so it kind of opens the space up a little bit. And then eventually I ended up on that one. And that was a finished painting. So I'm going to end with a quote by Alex Katz. So there was a really nice piece on Alex Katz in the New York Times magazine section. And so when I was in school as an undergraduate, like figurative painting was dead. Like no one did figurative painting. I had to like learn on my own. I'm not like a self-taught artist, but I feel like a self-taught artist. And what I liked Alex Katz said is the vocabulary or grammar is all out of abstract painting. That's what makes my painting different from other figurative painters. And I think that's true. And that's why with composition, it really comes down to, even though, and any figurative painter will probably tell you this, yes, there's kind of content and like people in it, but really it still comes to those basic elements of like composition, color, line, form. And my paintings, when I'm kind of working them out, so once I have the final image, the photograph I'm working from, then I project it on the wall with my overhead projector, and I move the projector back and forth. So the painting could be 4 foot by 4 feet, or it could be like 14 inches by 15 inches. And often, since I have the composition worked out first, the final images, a lot of the sizes of these paintings are like 15 and an eighth by like 14, or like 13 and 3/4 by 15 and a half. And it sounds silly, but like that ½ inch, like when I'm projecting it, I know what kind of feels right, and I have a certain size I kind of want the figures roughly. And even if you pull the image back and it gets a little bit larger, that like extra ½ inch completely just changes the whole thing. And so, so then once I have that, then I basically cut out wood and I mount it over wood so that I have that substrate. So, so that's it. So thank you. Oh. I went for a long time. Any questions? Yes?
How does it feel making like these teeny tiny little duplicate paintings of other artists' work? Do you have to like research how they went into painting?
I'm sorry. How does it feel to make small miniature paintings like that?
In your paintings, you're making like duplicates of other artists' work. Do you have to like research how they created their paintings? Do you have to use your headspace? Like how does
So, kind of. So, yeah, how I'm going to paint like a Holbein is going to be different how I'm going to paint like a Bryce Martin. So it's not exactly kind of duplicating their process. So when I was making the miniature sculptures, as a figurative painter, I initially started off with the abstract expressionist, because I always thought, when I grew up at a time when like abstraction is like good painting, right? And figurative was like not considered good. So I thought if I could see how the artists work, duplicate their process, that maybe I'll become an abstract painter. And so there was a lot of research in that. I was terrible at abstract painting. I just don't think that way. It's a little different, but not too different with these paintings, is that I often find I do actually have to kind of make the paintings similar to how they were, those other artists make them. You know, with Ellen, well, I didn't make one of Ellen Allfest. I'm not going to spend like 10 months making like a miniature painting. But often it's a little bit about like layering and kind of like letting the work like kind of build up and kind of getting the light right. So these are not like photo real. I'm not trying to be like a photo realist. And often the color is, you know, I love color. And as a painter, we can have that, you know, freedom to do that, so that often the saturation is a little more hyped up. So you know, I do have some freedom, and then there's painterly passages. I'll kind of have where I just like, I'm like, that's like a really good like hand or something like that. But within the paintings, yeah, often it's kind of getting into the head of that artist. Yeah, it is actually like that, because then you're really like looking at how they build things and how, well, you guys do this, like, right? Like how things kind of curve and how they're kind of just connected together. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple questions, but one of them just struck me when at your exhibition, and at any of the exhibitions of yours, I always find myself tripping over what's real and what's illusionistic in the work. And frequently, like when you're painting the paintings behind them, they have this weird presence of reality, even if they're not particularly realistically painted to begin with. So do you mind commenting on that? And then also, what was the hardest painting that you've had to sort of replicate in your work?
Ooh. So probably the hardest one, this is going to sound really, I didn't have an image of it. I did a painting of a Frank Stella painting, which is basically squares within squares within squares, but they were all like colored. And so like straight lines are really hard, right? Actually, so tip, straight lines, I learned this from Will Cotton. Use it like a ruler or like a piece of wood. So like a stick. So I'll like hold up a stick and just line like, literally on the camera, go like zip to get like a straight line. I found kind of the abstract paintings. I did also like a Cecily Brown painting, and that was really challenging because I'm trying not to render it, but those works have so much history and kind of built up layering and surface that you're trying to kind of recreate that in a trompe-l'oeil effect without it making look trompe-l'oeil. So those are probably the challenging ones. Yeah, like probably more the abstract paintings. Like this is going to sound terribly cocky of me, but like I'm currently working on a series. So I was very lucky enough to go see the Vermeer show at the Rijksmuseum last May, and I'm doing a whole series about 12 or 13 paintings to do the whole show. And I'm like, I could do a Vermeer. But like a Frank Stella is like really hard. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, this might be like a strange question, but how should young artists approach managing money?
Managing money.
Yeah.
Good question. And there's someone here who could actually really answer that for me. Well, I mean, you need to live, right? You need a job to support yourself. If you're not financially set with a family. So I would say if you have to have a job, try to find something that doesn't infringe on your life with as little, as possible, where you're not like taking it home with you. And or something. So when I got out of undergraduate school, I ended up getting a job at SVA, and I worked within the administration. And that actually worked out really well for me because it was like a 10 to 6 job, and I'd go home and I wouldn't think about work, and then I'd get to work, and then I'd be in my studio and I'd make my own paintings from start working from like 7 or 8 o'clock at night until like 2, 3 in the morning. And I didn't have to be at work until 10 the next morning. And so it was like not too complicated. The other thing with that was really helpful is that I was still within a creative environment, and actually a lot of how I met my dealer, Cristin Tierney, when I moved from Brooklyn to Connecticut. A mutual friend who I knew from SVA was an art historian and said, "Oh, you should go meet Cristin Tierney." At the time, she didn't even have a gallery. She was just as an art advisor. And then years later, she opened up her own gallery. And so we were like friends first. But that connection with Monroe. And then also when I was at SVA, I ran a summer residency program, like you guys have here, right? Summer program. And I was hiring faculty and guest speakers, and I hired Jerry Saltz and some other people. And so then when I was in grad school, kind of those connections, it still comes down to, the work. You have to put the time into and work, right? The work has to be good, and you have to put the work in. But those other, being within a creative environment also kind of helps. However, with that said, I know like Tara Donovan, who's an amazing artist, when she got out of school, she just like bartended and worked like three days and did like 3 double shifts. And then that she could have like 4 days off in a row and made like a bunch of money to then pay for her rent and her studio, and then would have 4 days off to just like work. So it kind of depends on. I've never been a waiter or bartender, so it kind of just depends on what's your personality and what job is best. And then and then I also got into debt, with credit card, but I would never get into enough debt. I'd always be, my philosophy when I was younger and before I kind of had any showing, with galleries, that I would be like a painting sale away from paying off that debt. So if I had like, I would never get more than like $2,000 in credit card debt, because then if I could sell a painting, which eventually then I would, then I could like pay that off. And that was kind of leeway until then, until eventually later, I was lucky enough to have more success.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, there seems to be, I wanted to go back to the work a little bit. There seems to be a sense of voyeurism in
Yeah.
your work, and I wanted to see if you would explain that a little, or go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, there totally is. So the interesting with the sculptures, which are that small scale, I always call it sort of like a God's eye perspective, and it is voyeurism. And you live here in New York, like you can't help but like look in windows, right? And the most amazing thing. So again, I was like. So now I live in Sarasota, Florida. I came up yesterday or Monday night yesterday, and then today I was in the museums and galleries, and I'm just like looking at people. I'm looking at the artworks, obviously, but then also looking at people. And the nice thing is like no one pays attention to you because you're in a public space, and everyone's like taking pictures, right? But yeah, there's total voyeurism involved in it because people are interesting, and even my earlier. I've always painted people, and I've always found people fascinating, and people what they do for a living. Work is such a big part of how we're defined, and so even early on when I was making those paintings before I started focusing on artists, I was focusing on people at work because I found that really just kind of defines them. And kind of goes back to the Studs Terkel book. It's like, what do you do? Like, what's your job? And the interesting thing with the Studs Terkel book was that there were people who had what we'd kind of consider like very like lowly jobs. And some of them were the happiest people ever. And then like CEOs and stuff would be like miserable. So it almost then became a question of like, what is happiness? Like, what is success? And I think that goes back to as young artists, right? It is like really tough being an artist. Like, it is not easy, and it's like you gotta be like lucky. You have talent, luck, but it's no secret. Like artists are successful. I think for the same reason people in other professions are successful as well, right? Luck, hard work, dedication, doing something that you care about, and like most important, like don't be an asshole. Like no one wants to work with an asshole, right? Like no way. Like it just sucks. So like, and artists are like not dime a dozen, but like you see this like in Hollywood, like all of a sudden like these big stars will kind of like disappear because like they're assholes and like they don't want to work with like certain people, and then they kind of get pushed aside, and then there's always someone right behind them. So that, and then like community and friends is like really important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, you in the back there?
I think you're being, if I may, a bit modest earlier when you were talking about this system, because you might remember that I took a picture of it and sent it to her, and she came back and said, "That's my painting." I said, "Yes, that's your painting." And she said, "That's not a photograph." And I said, "No, it's not a photograph." And she said, "How did he paint my painting?" And I said, "He's a good artist."
William worked for Cecily Brown for a number of years, and so he knows her. Well, thank you. Yeah, well, yeah. Well, and those are those days where like you're like, yeah, I'm like a really good artist until like tomorrow, and then it's like, I suck and like I wasted my time. So the gallery went there. They were and Candace like, oh, you should do like so I did like a watercolor at one point, and like watercolors I find like really hard, and they're like, oh, you should do more watercolors. So I'm like, so I tried doing watercolors, and it was like, and so I did one, so I did another one, and it came out pretty good. And I'm like, oh, this is good. I sent it to him, all excited, and then like, so I'm like, maybe this week I'll do like 4 watercolors, and like I send them to the gallery, maybe they'll sell them and stuff. So then the next day I do like another one, and it was like I overworked it. It sucked, and I'm like, I am the worst at this. Like, what am I doing? And so then I just gave up doing watercolors. I went back to working on the Vermeer paintings. But so you have those days, but the Cecily Brown. But I do. You can't. You just got to keep working it until it feels right to you. I think the famous line Matisse said, "I never finish a piece. I just stop at the right time." And so I just keep working something until it feels until it's done. Yes.
Hi, I'm not sure I can tell every artist makes art for other people to see, even if it's only themselves, and you show us that it's nothing without the people looking at it.
That's true. So these work, especially these works, you're right. It's and that kind of goes. Well, even here you have so you have studios, right? Everyone here who's a student has studios. So when I was in even when I was in undergrad or grad school, the studio, this environment is also a very similar. It's different, but it's really no different than having a gallery show because the work is always out, right? And so, not that you should be like competitive with your classmates, because you should be competitive with yourself, right? You just want to be the best artist you can. But it's also an opportunity to be like, if I see what Amy's doing in her studio, it's like, oh, I'm gonna like show her, and I'll like make something in my studio to kind of like have people walking by be like, oh shit, look at that. But the work needs to be seen for sure. And I mean, I guess these are also an homage to people. Well, I've been very lucky. My friend Monroe Denton, I've gone gallery viewing with him, and oh my, this guy is like so. I like art, but like art historians and like other academics, they like love art. Like I want to kind of be in a studio doing my thing. And when you're with people like that, it's like they don't even make art and they just like love it so much. You're like, oh, like thank you. And so in some ways, it's kind of homages to them as well. Yeah. So as an artist, right? So you can't live in a vacuum, right? Not only as an artist, you need yourself, you need your friends, your fellow artists, but you need like a venue to show the work, gallerists, but also once you get bigger, you need people to write about it. You need museum curators. You need the people to come to see it. Like the art world is really a community, and all those things are kind of all interconnected. And I'll tell the younger people this. I had a very big epiphany when I was probably your age. I was working at School of Visual Arts, and I was working for the International Students Program, where my job, I worked with other people who ran those programs, and we went over to Asia to kind of go to schools and kind of recruit students. So I was in Hong Kong with another artist named Bing Lee, and we were, and he was a pretty big artist. He did the Canal Street tile mosaic subway on Canal and Broadway. So anyway, so we went out to dinner afterwards, and in this dinner it was like big time, gallerists, like some artists, like people I didn't know, but also like writers for like Artforum. And I was in my 20s, and they were all like my age now. And I just remember thinking like, oh, I get it. If you like stick with it, at some point, all your friends, instead of like being, working, if you're a writer and like kind of like doing an internship someplace, like you're going to be writing for like Artforum, or you're going to be like, instead of like being like an assistant curator, you're going to be a curator at a museum. And that's kind of how all these things work, and just like stick with it. I was out to dinner last night with a friend of mine who's now the collector for JP Morgan Chase and buys all the work for that. She bought 7 of my paintings. I think hopefully because they were good, but it was like, and not as a favor, but that's like, that's kind of how it goes. It's like perseverance and persistence. Yeah. And don't be an asshole. Yes, you have a question.
So the artist Marcel Duchamp said the spectator makes the picture. And I think your series Contemplation really shows that off, and that the viewer's act of contemplation is just as important as the painting. And I really appreciate hearing the story about Nicole Eisenman asking how you could paint her painting.
Ah.
And because you are, in a sense, not in the way that Sherry named it, appropriating other artists' work into your composition, and as we are in the age of AI, and this whole question of intellectual property is at the forefront of many of our minds, tell us a story, or have you ever had a different reaction from an artist who knew that you were incorporating their work into your painting?
No. I haven't. I had when I was making the sculptures of artists in the studios. That was a very collaborative process, and so I did have. So I understand like the studio is a very private space, and so some artists, actually include Bryce Martin, he in this case he would write me back and say, thank you, but like no thank you, and some other artists had done that as well, and I kind of get that. With this series, I've been so far it hasn't happened where and I'm always very hesitant once I kind of finish a painting, like even like Marilyn Minter, and I kind of knew her through SVA, and some other friends knew her, and I'm like, do I tag her on this or not? Like, because I'm not getting their permission at all to do this. But then so far it's been positive, yeah. But I don't know. Hopefully it'll continue to be that way. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. And thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate it. You're welcome.